Welcome to the Rotary Times Show, a public service program presented by Rotary District 7610, Virginia. Funding for this program is made possible by the generosity of Rotary District 7610, Virginia. On our program, we speak with Rotarians and community leaders to discuss how Rotary International builds partnerships to support local, national, and world communities. I am your host, District Governor Paporowski from the Rotary Club of Bailey's Crossroads. Since 1988, we have seen a worldwide reduction in polio cases at a rate of 99%. Polio eradication has dropped to cases in only 2 countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Joining me today remotely to discuss our Rotary Zone 33 polio initiatives is past District Governor Chuck Davidson of the Rotary Club of Springfield, Virginia. Welcome, PDG Davidson, to the Rotary Times Show.
Thank you, Pat. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, great. Well, the first thing we'd like to do is if you could give a little summary about Chuck Davidson, your career in Rotary, and a little bit about the position that you serve in right now.
Well, I'd be happy to, Pat. I've been in Rotary for just a shade over 50 years, which of course makes me an old timer. I joined Rotary in El Paso, was the president of that club, the president of the Springfield, Virginia Club a couple of times, and since that time, I have had the pleasure of serving as the governor of this particular district in 2008-09. And since then, I have served as a district Rotary Foundation chair, 3 years as an assistant regional Rotary Foundation coordinator, and I'm currently in my 4th year as a zone End Polio Now coordinator. So you can see I'm sort of typecast now in the fundraising business.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck. And I will say you are a seasoned Rotarian, but your mind and your vision is always contemporary and to the future, and that's what we need from our Rotarians. Well, let's get to the polio question. What is polio? A lot of our audience really doesn't know much about it.
Well, that's right, and that's because we haven't been bothered by that in the United States since 1979, which was our last case of polio. It is a virus, so it has similarities to COVID-19, which is a virus. It has been around as 3 different particular types of polio, 2 of which have actually been eradicated from the face of the earth. It's transmitted from one person to another, and the people affected are most typically children, by the consuming or eating or drinking accidentally or on purpose of water which is contaminated with sewage. Contaminated water, ingesting that, is the basic reason that polio is transmitted.
Right.
When one gets it, and there is absolutely no cure at all for polio,
right.
In one case out of every 200, paralysis can occur in different parts of the body. If that paralysis includes the muscles used in breathing, you're at great risk of death.
Yes, and it's a highly contagious disease, just as you've explained, through the water system. So along comes Rotary, and how do they get involved in this, and exactly what activity are they involved in?
Well, first, how did they get involved, and then how that morphed second. The involvement started in the late 1970s when Rotary decided it was time to really get involved in a large-scale humanitarian project that would improve the health of people in the world. To do that, they chose a pilot program in the Philippines where they made it their business to eradicate polio virus from the Philippines. It succeeded in that, and as a result of that success, the World Health Organization, or WHO, recognized that polio could be an organization of force, in fact, fighting polio. And so in the mid-1980s, a Polio Plus program was started in Rotary International with the objective of ridding the entire world of polio by its fundraising and its partnering objectives.
Right, and we might point out for our audience at that time, really it was only the Western developed countries that had, if you will, taken care of polio through their constant vaccine programs, while the rest of the world really had the problem at hand. And it was Rotary who recognized that. Well, now we went from just Rotary doing it in the Philippines, which was the test case, convincing the World Health Organization they could do it. How has that partnership with other organizations really expanded over the decades?
Pat, in 1988, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, or GPEI, was started, and today that initiative has 6 major partners. 2 of them are the partner organizations that actually work on the ground in place to vaccinate kids and eradicate polio, and those are the World Health Organization and UNICEF.
Right.
Another organization is charged with collecting the needs and the necessities to bring together vaccines, and that organization is called Gavi. And then the U.S.'s own Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, became involved in the monitoring.
Nice.
Finally, the final 2 of those 6 major partners are involved principally in funding, and those 2 partners are Rotary International and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Those 2 partners are the funding backbone and driver of the whole GPEI.
And it's good to point out, too, that Rotarians used to be highly involved in the delivery system for the local polio vaccination program, and now that we're making progress and having these other partners, that really takes and really just expands it across the world in a way that I don't think Rotary alone could have done.
That Rotary is actually involved with its people occasionally when they go on certain national immunization days in countries where sanitation is such that polio and its protection in the children there is not as strong as it should be. And that's for 2 main reasons. One, it gives the Rotarian a chance to see how his money is actually being spent. And secondly,
right,
it makes a difference in the children that each one of those Rotarians happens to vaccinate during this particular national immunization drive.
Now, you said, Chuck, there were 3 types of polio. 2 of them have been eradicated already. We still have 1, but I know that being a virus, just as we're experiencing with COVID, it can change and morph. So I know that there have been changes to the vaccine that we give in order to fight this. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? And, you know, CDC's monitoring of this has really been very helpful.
Surely, the principal vaccine used in developing countries, third world countries, is the oral polio vaccine. Pat, it's important to know that this vaccine uses a live but weakened virus as a part of its vaccination effort. And it's cheap, it's easy to administer. It can be administered by simply dropping a couple of drops in a child's mouth and so forth. And because of this, it can be done very easily around the world and fairly cheaply as well. However, this vaccination takes place against all 3 types of polio, because until recently there were still more than 1 type that was in fact endemic. And it turns out that because this live weakened vaccine is in fact live, that after it passes through the system of several children, going from one child to the next, because sanitation is poor, it is possible in rare instances for that virus in that vaccine to mutate from something that is harmless but alive to something that is virulent and can cause just as severe polio as if the virus came out of the wild, so to speak. It's because of this the vaccine has changed recently to make sure that there is a less chance of these particular types of poliovirus emerging and being virulent again. We call this vaccine-derived cases. The vaccine doesn't cause it, but as the vaccine and its virus passes through the body of a child, it can in fact go into other children. That by its very nature is actually good because that child is also then vaccinated, just as if he had gotten the drops. But if that vaccine contains virus which happens to mutate, then it will cause polio. And because of that, recent changes to the vaccine have eliminated the worst offender from the vaccine itself, so that that particular vaccine will not mutate and cause other polio cases. This has happened only in the last year and a quarter, and already we can see a dropping in these vaccine-derived cases of polio.
Thanks, Chuck. That sets the stage really well for our listeners. But we are going to take a short break and be right back and talk more with past District Governor Chuck Davidson on the issue of polio. Please stay with us.
We are this close.
We're this close.
We are this close
Of wanting to
making history.
This close to changing the world.
We are this close.
This close.
This close to making sure no child suffers a crippling disease.
Ever again. This close.
We are this close to ending polio.
Ending polio.
All we need is you.
This close.
If we don't act now, we may lose this chance forever. Help Rotary make history at endpolionow.org.
Welcome back to Rotary Times. We are here speaking with past District Governor Chuck Davidson about our Rotary Polio Plus initiative. Now, Chuck, you set the stage very well, but one more foundation question, I guess. Since we've been involved in this, what has happened to the program since the worldwide pandemic of COVID?
Okay, thank you, Pat. I think to start out, we need to point out some similarities between the polio virus and the COVID-19 virus, or actually between the two vaccines that are used to fight this. First of all, both of them have to be kept cold. They have to be kept cold all the way up until the point they're actually administered. Secondly, there's a detailed infrastructure involved in terms of the polio workers that administer the vaccine, to the equipment they have, the cell phones they use, the vehicles they need to get from their lab to the actual site of the vaccination. There's a striking similarity with how the effort to vaccinate against polio is and the same effort to vaccinate against COVID-19. Because of that, the Rotary Foundation had felt like there was a moral imperative, that's the words they use, a moral imperative to share that infrastructure that they use to getting the polio vaccine to the child with those people who were trying to get the COVID-19 vaccine to a recipient as well. And that's exactly what happened. It started a number of months ago now, and it still exists right now today, but a part of the infrastructure was dedicated, to vaccinating against polio was turned over to vaccinate against COVID-19.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, this is something that Rotarians should be proud of. This is an opportunity where something we've started, we've done, we've developed, and so forth, is being used to fight other diseases as well. And in the particular case of COVID-19, the relationship of the vaccines was such, in terms of keeping it cold and so forth, it was a natural thing to do. In the final analysis, we can say that the impact on polio vaccinations has been relatively minor. because it wasn't turned over completely, the infrastructure to COVID-19. It just became a shared thing. So this is a major event in the whole Polio Plus campaign, and I think it's something that we can be proud of as Rotarians.
Absolutely. I mean, it shows Rotarians that the investments they've made over all of these years is still returning benefits in a wider scope to those same countries. And gosh knows how fast COVID-19 went, and we are still in the process of trying to make sure that we get these the COVID-19 vaccinations to these other countries. So that's a terrific example. What is, we do know that Africa was finally declared polio-free about 2 years ago, I believe it was. And that brings up the question of how does a country get declared, free of polio?
Okay, thank you, Pat. It's really quite simple. If a country goes more than 3 years without a single case of polio, which has come in from out of the wild, that is to say, as opposed to being coming in from someone who was on an international plane ride and brought it into the country. 3 years of being polio-free, wild polio-free virus, will enable the World Health Organization to officially certify that country as being free of the wild polio virus.
And obviously there's a lot of testing, a lot of monitoring, a lot of investment that still has to go forward within those quiet years to make sure that in fact that country is polio free before it's declared. So the investment needs to continue, correct?
And not only that, Pat, the vaccinations continue as well, because it's necessary to maintain a degree of immunity at a certain level. And in third world countries, it's difficult to do simply because of sanitation problems. So even though no new cases will emerge, we're still in the business of vaccinating the population to keep the level of protection up as high as possible.
Right, and there's also recognition in Rotary regarding the importance of water projects, sanitation projects, etc., so that we can continue to shore up moving into a healthier community and hopefully eradicate polio. And speaking of that, how many countries and who are they that are left?
Pat, there are only 2 countries right now, Afghanistan and Pakistan, in which the polio virus out of the wild is still endemic, as they say. It's still there. We have not interrupted the polio virus from those particular 2 countries. And so people who live in those countries and whose immunization level is not as high as it should be are still subject to getting polio in those 2 countries.
Right.
I have to add one thing. Just because those 2 countries are the only countries in which polio virus is endemic doesn't mean there cannot be outbreaks in other countries, simply because a polio case is only one international plane ride away.
Absolutely. And you're kind of getting to my next set of questions. And I do understand that when we were working in Afghanistan and Pakistan for a long time was both countries were very resistant. But in the last 2 years, I think we've really made headway, as I understand it, with the Pakistani government. And they're really getting involved now, are they not?
Yes, they are, Pat. And for years, let's say there were inconsistencies in the government's treatment of the polio vaccination campaign. They wanted to do it, but they weren't always as tight on the enforcement of people to get vaccinated as to do it. And in fact, in several cases in Pakistan, there were very crude, but still effective and believable disinformation programs that arose, in which videos were circulated on the local TV channels of bad effects that were occurring to children as a result of being vaccinated against polio. Now, we know that all of those were fake, and we have cases, or we have examples of these videos which show from off screen the children being directed to now go into their act of bad symptoms as a result of being vaccinated. Nevertheless, those disinformation campaigns were very effective, and for a while they caused local hospitals to actually be overwhelmed with parents who brought their children in who had recently been vaccinated against polio.
Okay. And then I know we have spoken with the new government in Afghanistan, and at least at this point, they say they're still supporting the program, correct?
Yes, in fact, although when I brief this program to others, I often say, look to see what's happening in Afghanistan right now, and you decide whether the situation is better or whether it's worse. My own judgment now is the situation is actually better. We had cases before the change of government in which disputes occur between the existing government, the health minister in that government, the heads of the polio program within the country of Afghanistan, not having anything to do with polio, but still disrupting the situation. And when those people were forced to leave the country, that in fact was an impediment to vaccination in Afghanistan. In addition, there are some serious concerns by some of the people in Afghanistan concerning whether or not polio workers should go door to door, or whether or not they can only take place in the middle of a public square where they could be looked at by all.
Okay.
In any case, while this was going on and before the Taliban took over in that government, the Taliban was actually attending polio conferences in other countries, such as the country of Qatar. That's a good example of that. And also in cases in June and in cases in March where polio workers were killed in Afghanistan, the Taliban immediately came up on the net and denied any responsibility, whereas ISIS, the ISIS or ISIL, came up on the net and accepted responsibility right from the start.
Right.
So if you can believe these statements, these were not Taliban killings. These were killings that came about as a result of ISIS, the same group that recently blew up this mosque that killed several people there.
And Chuck, I want to get to two real quick things. One, we hear many times, do we still get vaccinated in the United States against polio?
And the answer is yes. Everyone that is born in a U.S. hospital or under the care of a U.S. doctor, unless their parents opt out, is automatically vaccinated against polio with the dead polio virus, the injectable virus vaccine that was developed by Dr. Jonas Salk.
And my
yes, where vaccinations are still taking place.
And my second question real quick is, I thought something you told us, we always get, well, we're so close to the end, can't we just stop now and save money? And you were speaking to the World Health Organization representative, and what was their estimate if we did that?
If we stopped today vaccinations worldwide against polio, the estimate is within a few years, there would be 200,000 new cases every year of polio. It would simply reemerge, and it would continue to keep coming forward until we can get rid of that last case. That's why we have not reached the case of diminishing returns. The returns are still very critical. We have to get that last case, like we did in smallpox, before we can declare it eradicated and then stop vaccinations against it.
Chuck, thank you so much for an informative interview and wisdom for people to listen to. Thank you for coming. Funding.
The pleasure has been all mine, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck. Funding for this program is made possible by the generosity of Rotary District 7610, Virginia. For the Rotary Times program, I am your host, District Governor Pat Borowski from the Rotary Club of Bailey's Crossroads, Virginia. You are welcome to join us at a Rotary Club in your area for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or service project. You can find us on the internet, and there are clubs close to you. Many clubs are hosting meetings virtually or in some hybrid format. You only need to look us up for the details. Remember, our time is your time, and together it is time well spent. Please join us for our next program as we continue to celebrate Rotary's 116 years of service above self.